Good evening, Sayak. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the correct
Sayak.
pronunciation. Yeah.
Perfect. Would you like to introduce yourself? Who are you? And I suggested prior to this recording and this interview with you that maybe you think of three keywords or three numbers that can maybe illustrate who you are. You don't have to follow that, but feel free to give a sense of who are you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently working as a deep learning associate at an edtech startup called Search, and I've been interested in machine learning since my undergraduate days. I guess if I could put it in numbers, like exact year, it would be late 2015. And three words, if I were to describe myself, would be developer, learner, and educator. And of the work, I like to work on applied ideas and binge watch movies on Netflix. So that's about me.
Cool. Thank you. In fact, I'm going to bounce back on what you said, the third keyword, educator, because the reason why we're doing this interview today is to show to others and explain to others a little bit of your work and your contribution to devlibrary.withgoogle.com. You have submitted and you were selected, your content was selected around blood cell detection. You're using, if I'm not mistaken, TensorFlow Object Detection API and also the GCP ML engine. Would you like to talk a little bit about this project? What maybe challenges you faced? What led you to do this project and share it in an open source way? What is it about?
Yeah. So currently the way pathologists work is they collect black blood samples from patients, and then they put in hours to analyze what's there inside a particular blood sample. Let's say what's the count of red blood corpuscles, what's the count of white blood corpuscles, and so on, because the distribution of these counts matter. Why they matter? Because they help you to understand maybe this patient will have any chronic disease or so on, because these counts are that important to understand, right? So because they put in many hours to analyze this, I thought maybe with computer vision we could develop something that would actually help them to analyze this better. Again, the idea here is not to replace any doctors, but to develop systems that would aid them in their further analysis, that would accelerate their analysis. So that was sort of the primary motivation for me to get started into this project. And I was looking for open source data sets with which I could get started, and fortunately and luckily enough there was one. And without sparing any more time, I actually started working on it. And yeah, I mean, because I use TensorFlow Object Detection API on a daily basis in my work, that sort of came out as a no-brainer for me to use it directly. And as far as GCP ML engine goes, I wanted to have a sort of service that would help me orchestrate the entire workflow without having to worry too much about the infrastructure setup, provisioning and deprovisioning of resources, and so on. So these are some of the technical factors that I put into consideration.
And tell me, one step ahead of that, were you looking for open data sets to then play with TensorFlow and GCP ML engine? Or did you have a special appetite in the healthcare area? What led you in the first place to think, hey, I'm going to analyze red blood cells and white blood cells? Was there a particular trigger? I'm curious because I have a lot of questions sometimes from developers and saying, how can I get started in one area? So you can either play with open data and just look what could interest you, or you have a special appetite or interest in a field. What prompted you in the first place to go into this health area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first point that you mentioned, that hey, I just wanted to play with open data sets and so on, because I think that is very important, because as a data scientist or an ML engineer, your sole bread and butter is data, right? You should be comfortable working with data of any kind. So but for this project, that was not my primary motivation. As I mentioned, I had observed this trend inside pathologists, that they put in a lot of hours to analyze the samples that they receive from their patients. And I was sort of looking for ways to aid their work by means of machine learning. And just some days back, before starting that project, I had read this blog post about machine learning doing wonders in the healthcare area, specifically the computer vision related technologies. And the fact that my work involves quite a lot of computer vision, so I was curious that maybe I could, if I could get access to some good data sets, I will try to apply computer vision and deep learning to put it to good use. So yeah, that was one of the prime factors for me that sort of triggered me into working into this project.
Got it. Thank you. What surprised you the most when you started using the GCP ML engine or any TensorFlow APIs? Is there something that surprised you? And if nothing really surprised you, where did you encounter any challenges and how did you overcome them as you were coding?
Yeah, so there were many surprises in terms of the infrastructure setup part. I was really surprised to see the usability and usability of GCP's ML engine, and also the kind of API integrations that you get with TensorFlow object detection API and GCP ML engine. So that was more on the technical side. And regarding the difficulties, the dataset that I was working with had extremely low number of samples. And as you may know, as human beings, if we are not constantly exposed to more and more samples, our learning may get restricted at some point in time. So the more practice you do, the better you get at your craft. So same applies for a machine learning model as well. So the data set was extremely small, and I had to think of ways to get around that problem. So I looked for different ways, and tackling the problem of low data regimes specifically for object detection related use cases, it's particularly very difficult. So I took that as a learning opportunity, and I sort of looked for ways to improve the performance of my models even on low data regimes. And I then sort of took it from there and applied all my learnings and got something working.
It's often said that 70% of the work when you're building an ML model is about data cleaning or ensuring that it's representative enough, or in your case, you were talking about the sample size. So it's interesting what you're sharing here as another perspective on that front. What advice would you give to someone, maybe someone who's starting coding or has a little bit of experience and would like to use Google technologies, maybe the ones that you were just referring, the GCP ML engine or other APIs? Do you have any specific advice you'd give to someone who wants to get started in that area?
Yeah, sure. Two things that I think are very important if you are willing to get started. Again, this is irrespective of any particular tech from Google. One would be to have some kind of drive, right? Because I wanted to do this, and this drive led me to do this. So having that kind of drive is important. And the second part is just have enough appetite inside you so that you can get started right at the very moment you want to get started. Don't delay things, don't procrastinate on the things that you want to achieve, because as Elon Musk and many other entrepreneurs say that work like tomorrow is your ending. So if you want to get started right now and use all the official documentation resources that you have at your disposal and just get started. So
I'm curious,
are the two things.
Thank you, Sayak. I'm curious, do you have a sense of how long it took you to work on that open source project around blood cell detection? Do you have a rough estimate? Because it's very easy to see the output, but behind the scenes, it's tough to get a sense of how long it took. And you're an experienced developer, so we have to take this with a grain of salt, but I'm curious, could you estimate maybe the amount of time it took for you to come up with that open source project?
The first decent implementation that I open sourced, I still remember it was 2 weeks of working to get it to output something decent enough. So 2 weeks, I will roughly say this. It was 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks, it was more related to hyperparameter tuning, adjusting certain model parameters and so on. So 2 weeks would be the prime time.
And 2 weeks full time, right? Like from morning to evening, a regular working day. All right.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good. What would be the worst advice that you've heard in our industry of developing and coding and building ML models? And if you don't have anything in mind, what would be the best advice? But I'm curious, first of all, if you have heard of any advice that you think you consider to be the worst or among the worst advice we can hear in our industry.
I guess I don't have any worst advice because I have been fortunate enough to be surrounded by extremely smart folks. And regarding the best advice, I guess it was from Sumit Chintala. He is one of the core developers of PyTorch. So he always says that get started hands on. Always get hands on when you are learning a particular library. Don't focus too much about the theory that's backing a particular library. Just get hands on, and the library should be friendly enough to put you put you to the test, and test your core to get to know the library better. So get hands on from day one. That would be my best advice.
Thank you. How can one get started with open source projects? Like if you want to contribute to one, do you have some piece of advice or wisdom you can share with fellow developers as to which one to pick if you want to be part of that community and contributing to an open source project? Or do you recommend maybe building your own project and trying to get other people to follow suit depending on your level of experience?
Yeah, I think getting started with open source contributions is really similar. It has many similar actually essence with just getting started in a particular programming language. I suppose, because also to get started into learning a programming language, you will have to know some of the programming syntaxes and general programming knowledge and so on. But for open source stuff, I believe you will already have some kind of basic knowledge to get around a particular project. So as long as you have cool ideas to work on, or you have some motivation to educate other people around you, I think that's enough for motivation to get started in any open source contribution, I would say. But primarily, contributing to open source has many aspects, and it varies from person to person. Because for me, open source contributions are primarily to give back to the community, which has been a benefactor for me. But also, open source contributions are also one's day-to-day responsibilities when working in a particular domain. But the aspect on giving back to the community is always there, because if you don't have that drive, I guess your open source contributions might get restricted up to a certain point in time. But if you always want to give back to the community, you will be forced to think of ways to make your open source contribution stand out. So yeah, as long so to cut the long story short, as long as you have cool ideas and you have a hunger to give back to the community, that should be enough for motivation to get started in open source.
I'm wondering what makes you excited going forward, Sayak, in terms of technologies you want to try out. I saw your GitHub open source project on blood cell detection was updated yesterday. I'm wondering if you have other ideas in mind to keep improving it.
Currently, I'm not actively working on the blood cell detection project, because I guess I updated it with the license, because some days back it did not have any open source license. So many folks had reached out to me that you should include an open source license to make it explicitly clear that folks can use your technology in a good spirit. But I definitely plan to optimize the model so that it can be used in tiny devices and can be integrated into, probably, who knows, into the microscopes of pathologists. Because again, as I mentioned, my motivation is to aid the pathologists here, not to replace their roles. So if I could figure a way out to integrate the models that I had trained into their microscopes by means of any tiny intelligent device, that would be awesome. And TensorFlow does provide a lot of tooling for deploying models in tiny devices such as TensorFlow Lite. So I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Excellent. Thank you, Sayak. This is the end of our interview. Any final words for fellow developers, or developers in India, or developers anywhere else around the planet? Any final few words? You don't have to have any, but in case you do.
Yeah, study, develop, eat, repeat.
Perfect. Thank you, Sayak.